Thank you. I was introduced a couple of years ago at the Portland City Club, and I was reminded that for a long time nuclear power was the Darth Vader of the energy business. Made me feel really warm and welcome, but it's kind of true. You know, there's that sort of thing hanging over nuclear power. So when you ask the question, is nuclear power sustainable? It made me think of an Olympian in the early 1970s who had a sign on his desk that said, "You gotta wanna." And it was a reminder to him of the intensity he had to put into this to become an Olympic athlete. But the relevance here is it's kind of pointless to talk about whether nuclear plants are safe or do you dispose of the waste or all those things unless you get past the threshold of does it even matter? You know, do you really even want it at all? And so the real question is, why would you want to? And here's one answer. Stephen Chu, during his Senate confirmation hearing, nuclear power is going to be an important part of the energy mix. 20% of our electricity, it is 70% of the carbon-free portion of electricity today, and it is base load. So I think it's very important that we push ahead. And here is the story on why the issue of climate change has changed the conversation with nuclear. As you know, there are two major sources of energy. They produce most of our energy, and they are the big carbon producers. The others, they vary somewhat, but it's in the noise, and they're all very low. So decarbonizing the energy mix means shifting from those two resources to something else over time, whatever period of time that is. And as you see, not all of the ones on the right are the same. You look at the right, you've got solar and wind, intermittent. You've got biomass, hydro, geothermal, not so much intermittent, but how much can you get? And then you've got nuclear. That is base load, and you can get a lot of it. And so that's causing people to say, does it need to be part of the energy mix? And what you're seeing is, starting around 2004, 2005, some very big name people who are big names in the environmental community starting to relook at that question. Some of those, Stuart Brand, James Lovelock, Patrick Moore, Jared Diamond, there's a long list of them, enough so that Robert Stone produced this documentary that he presented at the Sundance Film Festival, Pandora's Promise, to focus on who all of these people are and why they're shifting. It's a big, big shift in the conversation. One of those is Stuart Brand. This comes from an interview he had with NPR, and I put it up here because of the final statement that he made. He talks about how he shifted then, and he said, I finally got to the point where I'm so pro-nuclear now that I would be in favor of it even if climate change and greenhouse gases were not an issue. Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is, A, he took a fresh look at it, but B, it wasn't selling his soul. I mean, it wasn't a case of saying, well, I'm going to do this, accept this really rotten resource, but I'm doing it only because of climate change. He actually looked at it and said, it actually does make sense. Another person, Eric Wessoff, CleanTech Media, same kind of comment, and he ends by saying nuclear is a necessary part of the energy mix. So why do I put that up there? Well, in preparing for this, I'm looking at the internet, sustainability debates, and I go to this one website where they're talking about the great sustainability debate on nuclear power. And one of the arguments against nuclear power is never going to be the answer to climate change. Well, whoever said it was? Nobody. And so the issue here is not, is it going to be the answer? The issue is, does it fit in a portfolio that includes nuclear power with a lot of other resources? And then you've got people like this, you know, nuclear wins poised to kick nuclear's ass. Well, it's not a soccer game. You know, it's not a football game. We're talking about a very serious issue, and the serious issue, climate change, was really highlighted by the World Energy Outlook in their 2011 report, now their 2012 report, where they took a look at what it would take to limit the carbon concentration to 450 parts per million in the year 2035. And they developed a number of scenarios. And the significance of this, to me, is how dramatic the shift has to be to achieve that goal. Why 450 parts per million? Because 450 parts per million is, so they say, the magic number that keeps us from going more than 2 degrees centigrade, which is sort of a tipping point. And so they had their current policy scenario, And then they have a new policy scenario, which is, okay, we're going to do all these new things people are talking about. We're going to do renewable resources. We're going to do efficiency. We're going to do all these things. And it still got them to a very high number. To get to the 450 scenario, they had to make some radical shifts. And this is the difference between the 450 scenario and the current policy scenario. The total generation was reduced by 25%. So energy efficiency made up the biggest chunk. Fossil fuels were reduced to 33%. Big drop in fossil fuels. Hydro increased a significant amount. Non-hydro renewables almost tripled. Nuclear doubled. Cost impact incremental $16 trillion. Now, I think it's a very difficult challenge to get to this point. The point of this to me is there are a lot of different ways to get there. But if we put one scenario up and say that's going to be the scenario that's got to get there, our odds of getting there are going to be higher risk, much more likely. This is a scenario that seeks balance. It says there's a lot of different paths to follow. Any one of those could take over, but keeping them all on the table is really critical. Now, the other part of this picture that we also need to keep in mind is when you look at global energy, 82% of the people in the world have below average per capita energy consumption. 18% in the OECD countries are doing pretty well. The energy challenge over the next 20, 30, 40 years is going to be the challenge they create trying to raise their energy consumption to levels that take them out of poverty and take them out of very difficult living conditions. And so it's going to be efficiency, but it's also going to take generation. And just as a reminder, when we look at nuclear power, we need to think globally as well. There are 60 nuclear plants under construction as we sit here today. All but 2 are in other parts of the world. And most of them are being built by governments, and governments don't give a damn about subsidies. It's all being done, and these are governments that are doing nuclear, they're doing wind, they're doing solar, they're doing efficiency, they're doing everything. Now, of course, Fukushima had its own impact on the conversation. This was a little bit of a surprising chart to a lot of us. Public opinion in the U.S. has stayed pretty resilient. I think there were a lot of us that would have expected if there was a Fukushima, it would have been a nosedive. It really hasn't happened that way. Kind of a healthy attitude, 82% say we should learn the lessons from Fukushima and continue to develop newer nuclear plants that implement better safety features. In the European Union, we've had Germany, as you know, no nukes. We've had Switzerland cancel their plans for nukes. Italy has gone no nukes. But just last week, a couple weeks ago, we had, I think it's 11 different countries sign a statement speaking to the issue of nuclear's role in decarbonization in their view. And I think this was largely directed at Germany and Switzerland and some of those countries, that you have to keep nuclear power in the energy mix. The UK just recently came out with a very strong statement to the effect that nuclear power has to be part of the energy mix. Now, the other part of the reaction has been we ought to pay more attention to what's going on with small modular nuclear reactors. So why would that be? Now, this is a kind of a segue that I put in here so I could get to talk about my company at least a little bit. So NuScale Power, developing a small modular nuclear reactor. What does it mean? You can see it's a schematic, and inside that purple is all a pool of water. So this is a factory manufactured nuclear plant. It's about 70 feet tall by about 15 feet in diameter. We deliver it to the site, fully manufactured, assemble it, put the fuel in at the site. The outer shell is a containment. The inner shell is a pressure vessel. So the entire plant containment and all is immersed in a pool of water. It's cooled by natural circulation, so there's no pumps, no pipes, no valves, no pumps to fail, no pipes to break, no valves to fail. If anything goes wrong, you vent steam into that space between the pressure vessel and the containment. That pool of water is a natural heat sink. What we would do is build a large building. We could build smaller buildings and cluster them together so that if you only want 1 or 2, you only put 1 or 2 in. You can also add units up to 12 to make a 500 megawatt plant. What this does from an economic standpoint is it changes the profile on cost. It changes the financial profile on what it takes to build a plant. But what it also does is it changes in a quantum direction the safety of the plant. Because that large pool of water is an ultimate heat sink. So that actually what we've done is we've shown that pool of water lasts for 30 days. At the end of 30 days, it may boil off if you don't assume any recondensation or anything else. But at that point, the decay heat is so low you can cool those modules by air. So basically, you can walk away from it. So I finished by talking about waste. That's also a concern to people. First question people ask me is, what do you do with it now? Answer is, it goes into pools of water at the site. It stays there for about 5 years. At the end of 5 years, 10 years, they take it out of the pool of water, put it in dry casks, and it's stored in dry casks at the plant site. But of course, that's not the question that people are concerned about. People want to know, what's the ultimate answer? What are you ultimately going to do with it? And, you know, I think we would all agree we've made a pretty big mess of our efforts to handle that and to manage that. The President's Blue Ribbon Commission just released their report about a year ago and recommended that we start to look for a second repository. Who knows what's going to happen to Yucca Mountain? What a lot of people don't know is that we have an approved waste repository right now in New Mexico. It's been operating for 11 years. It stores transuranic waste. It's fully capable of handling fuel from nuclear plants. It's on a site that's 16 square miles. Only 1 square mile is used for this waste repository. There's plenty of room there. It's a very adequate repository. There are a lot of people who believe that the politics are such and the geology of this site is such that that would be a very suitable site for waste for a long time into the future. So there are places that it can go. It's just a very difficult process of getting through the politics.